Here are 10 things you need to know if you own a GoPro. I've owned GoPros for the last 10 years. The Hero 4 Silver was my first GoPro I ever owned. And over the course of 10 years from owning the Hero 4 Silver all the way up to the Hero 12, and including cameras like the GoPro Max and Mini, I've learned a lot about GoPros. Some of it I've learned the hard way with mistakes I've made. Other things I've learned before I made mistakes. So the first thing you need to know if you own a GoPro is the micro SD card you use in your GoPro matters. In other words, you don't just want to go and buy any old micro SD card. You want to get a micro SD card that has the proper read and write speeds for your GoPro. And there's a couple reasons for that. First of all, if you don't have the correct micro SD card, it can cause your GoPro to easily overheat. Your GoPro is going to have to work much harder if the read and write speeds on your micro SD card can't keep up. And hard work inside a camera tends to generate excessive heat. Secondly, without the correct micro SD card, you're going to have problems recording footage to that card. If the footage records, it's going to be very skippy and laggy, and it's not going to look good, and it's not going to be usable. Or your GoPro just may flat out refuse to record footage to the card. So GoPro is really good about making it clear which micro SD cards they recommend based on your GoPro model. And I've provided the link to that in the description so you can check it out later. But the cards that I have found have always worked well for me are the SanDisk Extreme or SanDisk Extreme Pro micro SD cards. I've used those cards for years in my GoPros, and this one right here, this 512 gigabyte one, this is a SanDisk Extreme, and I have used this in all of my GoPros since the Hero 9. Probably should think about replacing this card soon. That's been a lot of read and write hours on this card, but this card has not let me down. I've never lost footage with this card, and it's been a great, reliable card. The next thing you need to know is how you use your GoPro relative to the sun matters. Now, what I mean by that is if you were facing the sun is up here right now, or if you're facing away from the sun with your back to the sun, it makes a huge difference in how your footage looks. Now, if you're facing toward the sun is going to be the brightest object in your frame, and what's going to happen is your GoPro is going to automatically adjust the exposure, and it's going to usually expose for the sun, but it's going to tend to make the rest of your frame really dark. So in general, when recording with the GoPro, I usually recommend having the sun at your back or having it 45 degrees over one of your shoulders behind you. That's going to produce the best looking footage with this camera. The footage is going to have a nice look to it. It's going to be properly exposed, and it's going to be fairly evenly exposed. You're not going to have a real bright spot in the sky and then real darkness at the ground. However, there will be situations where you can artistically use the sun to your advantage. Sometimes you may want the sun behind a subject in your footage, and you might want to have your subject lit with the sun around them. So there are artistic use cases for that. But in general, if you're just filming something and you're not using the sun artistically, I highly recommend having the sun behind you. Speaking of exposure control, the third thing you need to know is you can adjust the exposure control on this camera for a frame. And what I mean by that is you can selectively pick part of your frame. You can adjust the exposure value there to have it properly exposed. Let me demonstrate. Right now I've got the GoPro in video mode here. Let's say I want to adjust the exposure a little. So let's say I want to properly expose this tree right over here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down on the screen until this box pops up. So you can see right there when I did that, it made this part of the frame properly exposed, so it brightened the ground here, and it kind of brought out more of that detail in the shadows. So you can drag this box around. You see if I drag it up to the sky to properly expose the sky, see how dark it makes the ground there. Big difference. So what I want to do is I want to drag this down. I want to drag it back to the tree. And then once I've picked the spot where I want it properly exposed, I'm going to select the check mark, and then it's going to set the exposure bracket. So now if I want to record, it's going to properly expose that part of the frame. So this is great as long as you were facing in that same direction. But if you were turning direction, let's say I did a 180 and I'm facing the opposite direction, then I would want to reset this at that point, and I would want to set it to a different exposure bracket, depending on what I wanted prioritized in my frame. So if you want to reset that while you're recording, or even if you're not recording, all you have to do is tap it, and it's going to take it away. And you can see right there, it went back to the default exposure with this part of the frame darker, this part brighter. But let's say I wanted to reset it and have it over here. I'm just going to touch on the screen. I'm going to reset it there, and I'm going to hit the check mark right there. It sets the bracket again. Like I said, you can do that while you're still recording, or you can do it in between recordings. But if you stop a recording, the bracket's going to remain. The bracket's not going to go away until you tell it to. The next thing you need to know about GoPros is Hypersmooth will not work properly in low light or at nighttime. Now, Hypersmooth is the form of stabilization that's built into the GoPro, and this is a type of EIS. EIS stands for Electronic Image Stabilization. It needs frames that are sharp enough in order to properly stabilize those. And the problem with that in low light or at nighttime is those frames are going to have more motion blur in them because the shutter speed is going to be slower. And a slower shutter speed just does not work properly with Hypersmooth. Your footage will have jitter and ghosting in it. And what I found when experimenting with GoPros over the years is you need to have a shutter speed of at least 1/200, or you need to have Hypersmooth turned off. So you need a fast enough shutter speed, or you need Hypersmooth off entirely. So if you do turn off Hypersmooth entirely, you're going to want some type of mechanical gimbal to stabilize the footage. There are other potential ways to stabilize it when editing later on. I'm going to talk about those in a little bit, but a mechanical gimbal is often going to be a good tool. And if you do want to have your shutter speed set to at least a minimum value, then the next thing you need to know is going to come into play. And that next thing you need to know is GoPro has a special firmware called GoPro Labs. That firmware is free, and it's pretty easy to install on the GoPro. And that firmware unlocks a lot of advanced features that you can program into your GoPro. These include setting static shutter values, setting static shutter angles. You can also have the ISO and shutter speed display on your GoPro screen. I personally like that one a lot. You can set your GoPro to record at a higher bit rate. I sometimes do that. You can set it all the way up to about 200 megabits per second, which of course is going to make larger file sizes, but it can theoretically get better quality out of your GoPro. So that's a good one to consider as well. But with this Labs firmware, you can basically create a bunch of custom QR codes, and you can then scan them with your GoPro. And whatever that QR code is set to, it's going to apply that to your camera. So that can be a good option for avoiding the ghosting and jitter. But I definitely encourage you to try out GoPro Labs. There's so many settings you can adjust in there, and it's going to help you get even better footage out of your GoPro camera. So the sixth thing that you need to know is GoPros have gyro data. Now what that means is the GoPro, when it's filming footage, it has a gyroscope inside that's constantly monitoring how the GoPro is moving up and down, side to side. It's constantly measuring those movements, and it's going to bake that data into the video file. And what that's going to let you do is later on, if you did have Hypersmooth turned off, or even if you had it on, if you want to add stabilization to that footage while editing, you can use a tool such as GyroFlow. GyroFlow is free, and you can add stabilization to that even if you had Hypersmooth turned off. In addition though, GoPro has an app called GoPro Player, and within the GoPro Player, there's an optional $99 feature known as Real Steady. Now, some of you may have used Real Steady back in the day before GoPro owned it. GoPro bought Real Steady and integrated it into their GoPro Player program. And GoPro Player does work on macOS and Windows. But what you can do within Real Steady is the GoPro will also use that gyro data to stabilize the footage in post. So that can be a great option if you're doing something where you don't want Hypersmooth turned on and you want to stabilize it manually later on. Real Steady does a fabulous job, and GyroFlow, for being an open source product, it also does a great job as well. So a lot of times if you're using this on a drone, like an FPV type setting, that's a good use case to have Hypersmooth off. And anytime you're using it with a shutter speed slower than 1/200, you're going to want Hypersmooth off. Like if you're using ND filters on here and you have the 180-degree shutter angle, so if you're filming in 24 frames per second with a shutter speed of 1/48, you would want to have Hypersmooth off and probably have this on a mechanical gimbal. And even if you use this with a gimbal, there can still be some shake with the gimbal, especially if you're using a more budget level gimbal. So GyroFlow or Real Steady can be a great option for that as well. And the great thing about the gyro data is it's available in pretty much all video modes on most of the GoPros. So regardless of what mode you're filming in, you should have the gyro data available there when you edit later on. Now, the next thing that's important to know is GoPros can overheat. Yes, it can happen, but there are some key things you can do to mitigate that risk, or basically put that risk to zero. Now, to be clear, what I mean by overheating is the GoPro gets so hot that it flashes a message and turns off. The GoPro is not the only camera that overheats though. I've owned several other action cameras as well, and I've had them overheat on me too. Some much more easily than the GoPro. But there are three basic things you can do to prevent overheating on the GoPro. The first thing, make sure you have one of the recommended cards that GoPro recommends for your GoPro. The second common source of overheating is if you're using this camera stationary with Hypersmooth turned on. So if I had my GoPro on this tripod right here, and I was filming, let's say, a 30, 45-minute, 1-hour video talking to it, if the camera's not moving at all, there's no reason to have Hypersmooth turned on. Hypersmooth doesn't need to do anything. So just simply turning Hypersmooth off can result in a lot less heat generation in your GoPro. And the third thing that can often result in overheating is if you're doing a long extended clip with this, even if you are moving, but if it's really hot outside, let's say you're fishing in the middle of a lake on a 95-degree day and you have it mounted on your boat, and maybe you're moving along at 5 miles per hour, or maybe you're moving and then stopping, that's going to be a common scenario where this camera could overheat. So what I like to do is I typically don't film a clip more than about a minute. And then when I edit the footage later on and put it together, I've got several smaller clips. It saves micro SD card space, and I've never had it overheat on me when using it. And it's also good to keep in mind that a lot of the newer GoPros have a mode where you can go back in time 15 or 30 seconds. So let's say you're out there fishing on the lake and you're reeling the big one. If you have your GoPro mounted there where it could see you doing that, if you hit record, it's going to go back in time 30 seconds ago, and it's going to put that footage into a file. So in a way, your GoPro is constantly recording, but it's not. Your GoPro is seeing everything that's happening, and it's temporarily maintaining that within the GoPro. So that can be a good workaround if you've had overheating problems when doing those longer type clips. But applying those three things almost always will eliminate most, if not all, overheating issues. Item number 8 that's important to know is GoPros do have a minimum focus distance. Now what that means is this GoPro, you need to have it back a certain distance from yourself or your subject when you're filming. Otherwise, they're going to be blurry and out of focus. Now for most GoPros, you need to have it back at least a foot, but I recommend doing back about 18 inches or a little bit further. I find 18 to 24 inches to be a good sweet spot. So that's where having a good selfie stick comes in. And I'm going to talk about one that I recommend later on. It's a really affordable, great value. Because if you're vlogging with this camera, you probably don't want to hold it out a couple feet. It's going to hurt your arm, and it's going to be a little bit weird trying to walk along like this. And also do keep in mind that the GoPro does not have autofocus. The GoPro has a static aperture and it has a static focus. So it's not going to necessarily separate your subject from your background. So it is important to keep that in mind. If you want an autofocus type camera, action cameras like the GoPro and some of the others are not going to give you that. So the next thing you need to know if you own a GoPro is GoPro does have a subscription service. That service costs about $50 a year. And what that service offers is it offers unlimited cloud backups of your GoPro footage. You can upload it from the newer cameras directly to the cloud, which is a great feature. And it's not compressed footage either. It'll upload at the full quality that you filmed it in. The second thing it'll offer you is it'll offer you a lot of advanced features in the GoPro Quick app on your phone. So if you use the GoPro Quick app often and you want some of those more advanced features, it's great for that as well. The next thing it offers is you can buy a new GoPro and it'll give you $100 off the price of that GoPro. So that alone right there would pay for the $50 per year. But it also offers you a steep discount on GoPro accessories. So a lot of accessories from GoPro, they have a pretty good cost on them. But with the GoPro subscription service, I believe you can buy up to 10 a year with a discount. And I've bought a lot of accessories from GoPro and saved a lot of money. Sometimes that discount equals up to 50% on some of the accessories, which is a fabulous deal. The $50 per year just to get $100 off my new GoPro each year, I find that subscription pays for itself right away. So I highly recommend checking that out if you haven't checked it out. Speaking of accessories, the next thing you need to know if you own a GoPro, it's important to know that GoPro is not the only place to get good high quality accessories. GoPro does sell some incredible accessories and I do find the quality of them to be good. But there are other companies out there that do sell some great accessories, including some that GoPro doesn't make. Now, if you want a good starter pack of GoPro accessories that includes a wide variety of accessories, including lots of mounts, there's a kit that I've bought from HSU. I'll link to it in the description below. I found that kit to be great. It's got tons and tons of mounts in it, and the price is great. The price for that huge bundle works out to like less than $1 per accessory. So it is a great deal if you're starting off with GoPro, or if you don't own a lot of accessories yet. Other companies such as Ulanzi and Telesin, those are two that come to mind that sell a lot of GoPro accessories, and I've bought quite a few of them over the years. Now, the selfie stick that I mentioned, let me show that to you. Now, this selfie stick right here from Ulanzi is also a tripod. So the legs fold out nice and wide. I love using this for any time lapses or night lapses on my GoPro because this is really stable. Even when it's windy out, I have yet to have this fall over on me. And that's even in times when there's been 40 or 50 mile per hour winds. This is great for that. But what this also does is it extends up to 57 inches. So let me back up a little bit. So this extends way out. So you can use this as a great vlogging selfie stick. This mount at the top here, you can adjust the angle. So right here, you can easily mount the GoPro on it and have it at a 90-degree angle, which is perfect if you're filming like this and want the camera facing you. So this is an accessory I really like. I use it a lot, whether it's for time lapses, night lapses, or when I'm talking to the GoPro. And this accessory, last I checked, it goes for about $25. So the value is really good with this one. And the other accessory that I really find myself using a lot that isn't from GoPro is this power bank right here from Anker. So this power bank holds 20,000 milliamp hours of charge. And anytime I'm doing a time lapse or night lapse, I have my GoPro plugged in with the USB-C cable. And you don't have to have your battery in the GoPro when using this either. You can run your GoPro on this without a battery in it. So if you have a use case where that's beneficial, that's important for you to know as well. But the charge that this power bank holds, it can easily get me through several night lapses before I have to charge it again. And I'm talking about night lapses where I have the GoPro out there for 10 or 12 hours at a time. And of course, for daytime time lapses, this has plenty of charge too. And it's also great if you want to charge your GoPro on the go in between filming. You can just plug it in, give it a quick charge. Then when you're ready to use it again, you could unplug it, start filming again. And I've linked to all of those in the description below. So as I mentioned earlier in the video, one of the most elusive aspects of filming with a GoPro is filming in low light or at nighttime. If you'd like to learn more about conquering that and getting the best footage with your GoPro in low light, check out this video right here.